People think control comes from strength. They think it comes from authority, dominance, intimidation. But that's not how the world really works. Control isn't about who's strongest. It's about who's dependent. People are controlled because they want something. Approval, love, validation, comfort, status, security. When you need something from someone, you become predictable. And the moment you become predictable, you become controllable. That's the illusion the world sells, that people who obey are good, and people who resist are problematic. But the truth is simple. The world can only manipulate those who fear losing something. Look around. You'll notice the easiest people to control are the ones terrified of disappointing others, the ones desperate to fit in, the ones who can't handle disapproval. They fold under pressure, bend under guilt, and give in the moment someone threatens their sense of belonging. They think they're being kind, but really they're being controlled. Manipulators love people like that. Emotional predators thrive on them. The system depends on them. Because when you need people to like you, you let them pull your strings. But then there's a different kind of person, someone the world can't predict, can't pressure, can't push. The one who doesn't react to fear, guilt, shame, or approval games. The one who doesn't need permission to exist. The one who doesn't rely on the outside world for validation. These people are dangerous, not because they're aggressive, but because they're free, and freedom is the one thing the world cannot control. People who can't be controlled don't operate like everyone else. They don't need constant reassurance. They don't crumble when someone disagrees with them. They don't panic when things don't go their way. Their strength doesn't come from dominance. It comes from detachment. They aren't emotionally invested in winning approval or avoiding rejection. That's why shame tactics, guilt trips, and manipulation methods never work on them. You can't control someone who doesn't fear your opinion. When someone breaks free from the illusion of control, they become unpredictable in a way that scares manipulators. They don't respond to emotional traps. They don't chase acceptance. They don't fold under pressure. Instead, they calmly watch people expose their intentions. While everyone else is reacting, they're analyzing. While others seek validation, they seek clarity. And that clarity becomes their armor. Control only works when you fear losing something. But people who can't be controlled, they've already accepted the possibility of loss. They don't cling, they don't beg, they don't negotiate their dignity. They would rather stand alone than be owned. And that level of internal independence is what terrifies the world. Because you can't control a person who doesn't need what you offer. This is the illusion of control. It only works on those who surrender their power willingly. And the people who can't be controlled are the ones who refuse to surrender anything at all. Most people live their entire lives controlled by the external world. They don't think independently. They borrow their beliefs from others. Their emotions are reactions, not decisions. Their confidence rises and falls based on how people treat them. Their identity shifts depending on who's watching. And because their inner world is unstable, anyone who understands human behavior can manipulate them easily. They are controlled not by force but by influence, because their internal frame is weak. But people who can't be controlled operate from a completely different foundation. They don't let the outside world decide who they are. Their values, emotions, opinions, and decisions come from within. This internal frame is what makes them unshakable. They don't change their tone because someone disapproves. They don't panic because someone challenges them. They don't break because someone withdraws affection or validation. Their self-worth is not up for negotiation, and that makes them impossible to puppet. You've probably seen this dynamic before. Two people are being criticized. One falls apart. The other stays calm. Same situation, different psychology. The one with no internal frame thinks, if they're upset with me, I must be wrong. I must fix this. I must avoid conflict at all costs. The one with a solid internal frame thinks, their reaction is theirs, not mine. That difference is everything. When a man's internal world is built on his own standards, he becomes immune to judgment. He doesn't crumble when people attack his character. He doesn't get desperate when someone pulls away. He doesn't let guilt infect his confidence. Manipulators rely on emotional leverage, but there is no leverage where there is no dependency. An unshakable internal frame also creates a powerful side effect: emotional stability. When you don't rely on others for validation, you don't overreact when things go wrong. You can stay calm in situations where others collapse. You can think clearly under pressure. And emotional clarity is the deadliest psychological weapon a person can have. Manipulators depend on your panic. They depend on your fear. They depend on your insecurity. But when your emotions are controlled by your internal principles instead of external chaos, manipulation loses all its power. This is why people who can't be controlled often appear cold or detached to others. It's not that they don't feel. They simply refuse to let their feelings be used against them. They don't hand their emotional buttons to anyone. They don't give anyone the ability to dictate their mood or behavior. Their emotional independence creates confusion because manipulators can't understand a person who doesn't play the game. You want to know the real reason they intimidate people? It's because their internal frame exposes everyone else's lack of one. Weak people feel threatened by someone who doesn't need approval. Insecure people feel judged by someone who doesn't react emotionally. Manipulators feel powerless around someone who doesn't respond to guilt, pressure, or fear. And society itself becomes uneasy around those who don't conform to the emotional scripts everyone else follows. The unshakable internal frame is not about arrogance, it's about sovereignty. It's the silent, psychological space where a person stands on their own foundation, grounded, unmovable, untouchable. Nothing is more frightening to the world than a person who doesn't depend on it. Because once you master your internal frame, nobody can control you. Not through approval, not through fear, and not through rejection. You can't control someone who doesn't react emotionally. Manipulation relies on triggering feelings: anger, guilt, fear, embarrassment, jealousy, shame. The moment you react, the manipulator knows exactly which buttons work on you. They learn what you fear, what you crave, what you can't resist. But people who can't be controlled don't give you those signals. Their face doesn't crack. Their tone doesn't shift. Their heartbeat doesn't betray them. Their emotional neutrality becomes an unbreakable wall. Most people believe reacting fast is power. It's not. Fast reactions come from insecurity, from needing to defend yourself or prove something. The emotionally neutral person doesn't operate like that. They don't rush to respond. They don't explode. They don't break under tension. They let the moment run its course while everyone else exposes themselves. That silence, that calmness, that stillness, it terrifies people because it means they cannot predict what's happening inside. Manipulators depend on emotional feedback. They want you to panic so they can dominate. They want you to feel guilty so they can control you. They want you to get angry so they can flip the narrative against you. But when someone doesn't react, the manipulator loses their script. Their tricks fall apart. Emotional pressure only works on someone who feels pressured. But when someone stays calm, the pressure rebounds back onto the manipulator. This is why emotional neutrality is so powerful. When you don't react, the other person starts reacting to their own tactics. They begin doubting themselves. Why isn't he responding? Did I get it wrong? What is he thinking? What does he know? What is he planning? The manipulator becomes the insecure one. The aggressor becomes the confused one. The loud one becomes the exposed one. Because when your emotional state doesn't move, their entire strategy collapses. Another reason emotional neutrality scares people is because it makes you unreadable. If someone can't tell whether you're angry, offended, intimidated, or unaffected, they can't decide their next move. They don't know if they should push harder, back off, or run. They feel like they're fighting fog. Every punch goes through nothing. Emotionally neutral people don't get dragged into fights that don't matter. They don't take insults personally. They don't lose composure over petty situations. They don't let insecurity turn them into puppets. Instead, they evaluate situations logically. And logical thinkers can't be emotionally controlled. This neutrality also gives them a massive advantage in conflict. While the emotional person is blind with anger or fear, the neutral person is analyzing patterns, identifying weaknesses, and understanding the deeper intentions behind every move. You win battles not by overpowering emotions, but by not letting emotions overpower you. People who can't be controlled are not emotionless. They simply refuse to let emotions be used as weapons against them. And once you understand how to stay neutral in emotional storms, you stop being controlled and start becoming the one who controls the tempo. Predictable people are the easiest to control. They react the same way every time, get angry when pushed, insecure when ignored, excited when praised, guilty when pressured. A manipulator only needs a few minutes to map their emotional patterns. But the people who can't be controlled don't give you those patterns. They are unpredictable in the most unsettling way, not chaotic, not unstable, just unreadable. And unpredictability makes them dangerous. Unpredictable people don't respond to emotional traps the way you expect. When someone insults them, they don't explode. They stay calm. When someone tries to guilt-trip them, they don't apologize. They ignore it. When someone tries to provoke them, they don't engage. They observe. When someone plays mind games, they don't fall into the script. They rewrite it. And this throws manipulators into confusion because none of their tactics work. Most people want to predict you so they can control you. They study your reactions, your habits, your weaknesses. But unpredictable individuals refuse to operate on emotional autopilot. They choose their responses deliberately. Sometimes they speak. Sometimes they stay silent. Sometimes they walk away. Sometimes they stand their ground. Sometimes they reveal the truth. Sometimes they let the other person drown in their assumptions. This inconsistency is not a flaw. It's a weapon. Because the moment someone knows what you'll do next, they gain power over you. But when they can't map your moves, they start overthinking. They hesitate. They hold back. They second-guess themselves. The psychological advantage shifts instantly to the unpredictable one. Unpredictability also destroys emotional leverage. Manipulators need predictable victims, people who fear discomfort, who fear conflict, who fear losing someone's approval. But the unpredictable person doesn't fear any of that. They can be warm one moment and icy cold the next. Not out of cruelty, but out of independence. Their behavior is based on logic, not emotional obligation, and that makes them impossible to corner. People also misjudge unpredictability. They think someone who moves differently must be hiding something or scheming or dangerous. Their fear doesn't come from what the person does, but from what they might do. When someone has no emotional patterns, no obvious weaknesses, no predictable triggers, it creates a quiet intimidation that makes everyone cautious around them. This is why unpredictable people often get labeled as mysterious, intimidating, or hard to read. People fear what they cannot predict. And when someone breaks the pattern of emotional compliance the world depends on, they become a psychological threat. Unpredictability doesn't mean being unstable. It means being ungoverned by expectation. It means choosing your moves based on strategy, not pressure. It means you don't give anyone a map to your mind. And once no one can predict you, no one can control you. People who can't be controlled all share one thing in common. They have self-respect that cannot be negotiated. And nothing terrifies manipulators more than a person with boundaries that don't bend. Weak people chase acceptance. Desperate people settle for anything. But someone with real self-respect, he doesn't tolerate disrespect. He doesn't accept emotional games. And he doesn't cling to people who treat him poorly. That kind of internal strength makes him uncontrollable. Most people are controlled through attachment. They stay in toxic relationships because they fear being alone. They tolerate disrespect because they don't want conflict. They lower their standards because they think they won't find better. But self-respect changes everything. A person with self-respect doesn't beg for attention, doesn't beg for validation, and doesn't chase people who walk away. And when you can walk away, you become the one in control. Self-respect is intimidating because it exposes others. When someone refuses to tolerate manipulation, the manipulator is forced to reveal their true intentions. When someone enforces their boundaries, insecure people feel threatened. When someone doesn't crumble under pressure, people who rely on emotional weakness feel powerless. Your strength becomes their mirror, showing them everything they lack. People who can't be controlled don't argue their boundaries. They impose them silently. They don't explain why they deserve respect. They embody it. They don't announce their standards. They act on them. They leave situations that others would stay trapped in for years. That ability to walk away becomes a psychological weapon, because the person willing to walk away always has the upper hand. And the truth is simple. You cannot control someone who isn't afraid to lose you. You cannot manipulate someone whose dignity is more important than approval. You cannot pressure someone whose value doesn't depend on external validation. Strong self-respect also destroys guilt-based control. Manipulators use guilt like a leash, tugging on people's emotions to keep them submissive. They say things like, "If you cared, you'd do this," or "You're the problem," or "You owe me." But people with self-respect don't buy into emotional debt. They refuse to pay for things they didn't break. Guilt slides off them because they don't accept responsibility for other people's insecurity. Here's the other piece. Someone with self-respect has standards for themselves, too. They don't just enforce how others treat them. They enforce how they treat themselves. They don't lie to themselves. They don't sabotage themselves. They don't stay where they don't belong. And this level of discipline makes them mentally untouchable. Because the hardest person to control is the one who doesn't need anything from you. Not validation, not permission, not acceptance, not safety. A person who respects themselves makes choices based on principle, not pressure. And principles cannot be manipulated. That's why self-respect isn't just confidence. It's psychological immunity. Some people walk into a room and immediately shift the atmosphere. Not because they're loud, not because they're aggressive, but because their presence carries a weight most people can't fake. This is silent authority. It's not built from intimidation or ego. It's built from inner strength. People who can't be controlled carry this energy naturally. They don't try to dominate the room. The room adjusts to them. And that silent shift is where their power becomes undeniable. Silent authority comes from emotional control, self-respect, and clarity of mind. When a person is calm, composed, and confident without needing to display it, others feel it instinctively. They become more careful with their words. They lower their voice. They watch themselves. Not because the quiet person demanded respect, but because his presence commands it. The absence of chaos inside him creates a pressure that others have to adjust to. People fear loud men because they create noise, but they fear quiet, controlled men because they create uncertainty. Silent authority works because it acts like a psychological mirror. People suddenly become aware of their own behavior. They start noticing their insecurities. They evaluate every word they say, wondering how they're being perceived. They feel like they're being watched, even if the quiet person hasn't said a thing. That awareness is not forced. It emerges naturally from the calm presence of someone who doesn't need to prove anything. Unlike insecure dominance, which demands recognition, silent authority doesn't ask for attention. It draws attention. People lean in when you speak because you don't speak often. Your words carry weight because you use them selectively. Your silence feels intentional, not empty. And intentional silence is more powerful than a shouted truth. What makes silent authority so intimidating is that it removes all leverage from manipulators. They can't guilt-trip you because you don't overreact. They can't intimidate you because you don't flinch. They can't provoke you because you don't play their emotional games. Your calmness blocks every tactic. And a manipulator without leverage becomes powerless. People also trust silent authority more than loud confidence. Loud people usually want something: recognition, validation, approval. Quiet people with controlled presence don't need anything from others. Their independence makes their confidence real, not performative. That authenticity draws respect without force. You don't have to tell anyone what you are. They feel it on their own. Here's the final truth. Silent authority is not about being quiet. It's about being rooted. When you're rooted, people sense it. When you're stable, people follow your lead. When you don't chase approval, people give it voluntarily. Silent authority is the final evolution of inner power. It's the point where you don't need to control anyone, because your presence alone makes people adjust themselves around you. That's why people who can't be controlled often become the quiet leaders, the unspoken anchors, the psychological centers of every room they enter. People who can't be controlled aren't born different. They think differently. Their mindset isn't built on fear, approval, or emotional dependency. It's built on sovereignty. The ability to stand alone, mentally, emotionally, and psychologically. And that mindset is what makes them impossible to own, influence, or manipulate. They don't move with the herd. They don't follow emotional scripts. They don't fold under pressure. Their mind operates on a frequency most people never reach. The average person makes decisions based on fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of judgment, fear of losing relationships. These fears keep them obedient. But people who can't be controlled aren't guided by fear. They're guided by clarity. They think in terms of principles, not emotions. They decide based on what's right for them, not what others want from them. And that makes their actions unpredictable and powerful. A sovereign mindset means they don't need external validation to feel secure. Compliments don't inflate them. Criticism doesn't break them. Approval doesn't guide them. They stand grounded in who they are, independent of anyone's opinion. When someone doesn't rely on the world to define them, the world loses the power to control them. Manipulators try every tactic, but none of them work. Guilt doesn't move them. Silence doesn't scare them. Rejection doesn't intimidate them. Pressure doesn't break them. Why? Because all of those tactics only work on people who fear emotional discomfort. But the sovereign-minded individual is not afraid of discomfort. They don't avoid hard truths. They don't avoid loneliness. They don't avoid standing firm when everyone wants them to bend. They embrace the discomfort other people run from, and that makes them mentally untouchable. Another sign of the untouchable mindset is selectivity. They don't let everyone into their mental space. They don't give everyone their time, energy, or trust. They're highly selective because they know emotional access is power. They give that access sparingly, intentionally, and only to those who've earned it. This prevents manipulation before it even starts. They also value independence over attachment. People who can't be controlled don't cling. They don't chase. They don't depend on others to feel whole. And when someone doesn't fear losing people, they become impossible to manipulate. The threat of abandonment doesn't work on someone who's comfortable walking alone. The threat of disapproval doesn't work on someone who respects himself more than any outsider's opinion. The threat of conflict doesn't work on someone who thinks clearly under pressure. Most importantly, their mindset is consistent. They don't drop their standards when someone attractive enters their life. They don't compromise their integrity to fit in. They don't abandon their values to make others comfortable. This consistency builds an aura of power, the kind people feel but can't explain. The world is full of people who crumble under the slightest emotional push, but the ones who can't be controlled. Their mind doesn't bend, it doesn't break, it doesn't belong to anyone but themselves. People who can't be controlled live by one final rule: freedom over ego. Most people confuse rebellion with independence. They think saying no to everything makes them powerful. They think resisting everyone makes them strong. But rebellion is just another form of emotional dependence. If you're controlled by the need to oppose, you're still controlled. True freedom isn't about doing the opposite of what people expect. It's about doing what aligns with your principles, even if no one else understands it. This is where many people fail. They break free from manipulation, but then their ego takes over. They start acting superior. They isolate themselves. They cut everyone off just to prove they don't need anyone. And in that arrogance, they lose their balance. Independence without discipline becomes self-destruction. The same mindset that once made them untouchable turns them into prisoners of their own ego. People who can't be controlled know the difference between strength and stubbornness. Strength is the ability to stay grounded under pressure. Stubbornness is refusing to listen, refusing to grow, refusing to self-correct. The uncontrollable mind is not rigid, it's clear. It can adapt without losing itself. It can listen without being influenced. It can compromise without being controlled. That flexibility is what keeps their freedom intact. What truly separates the uncontrollable from everyone else is that their decisions come from clarity, not emotion. They don't seek revenge. They don't act out of pride. They don't try to prove anything to anyone. They aren't driven by ego. They're driven by purpose. And purpose is something no manipulator can weaponize. People also trust the uncontrollable more than they trust the easily influenced. When someone stands on their own values, their presence becomes solid, consistent, and reliable. You may not always like their decisions, but you can feel the integrity behind them. And integrity is the one thing every manipulator hates, because they can't twist it. This is the final law. You are uncontrollable the moment you control yourself, not your environment, not the people around you, not the circumstances, yourself. The mind that cannot be controlled is the mind that doesn't break, doesn't bend, and doesn't hand its power to anyone. Not out of ego, but out of clarity. And that clarity is the one thing the world can never own.